I would like to introduce to you two people we've all met before in the kin. One, David Krakauer, the president of the Santa Fe Institute. If you're not familiar with the Institute, look it up. It's an incredibly interesting, pioneering place. It is the complexity theory, chaos theory, all those things you've heard thrown around. This is the place. It happened and it is happening. And David, as a geneticist, as an evolutionary geneticist and researcher across multiple fields, will share a bit about his view for how humans might change. Then Moran Cerf, my good colleague at the Kellogg School of Management, a professor of marketing, who is studying the brain. He's studying the brain often when people are in for surgery, to see how they're reacting. He has direct access to our brains, and some of the things he's discovering are truly extraordinary. And following their opening remarks, we'll have a brief conversation. With that, David Krakauer.
All right. Marvelous to be here. It's nice to be in kin Miami as opposed to kin cold Chicago. And so Rob asked me to talk about this, who we are and who we will become. And, you know, about the 4th century BC, Aristotle described human beings as featherless bipeds. And he wasn't that far from being accurate. It took about 2,000 years to get it right, and Darwin got it right, and what we are is hairless apes. And he also showed us something a little bit more disconcerting, and that is that we're just another branch in the tree of life. This is a tree that has roots that extend about 3.5 billion years into the past, and you can't see because of a very small slide at the back of the room, but human beings are down there in the bottom right-hand corner, right next to chimpanzees, with whom we share about 99% of our genetic sequence. So we're not really very special biologically at all, and this has led to a lot of consternation and upset because people would love humans to be special. And so what we've done is, instead of look just at gene sequences, we've looked at gene regulation, how genes are turned on and off. And here's a study, a recent study that was published in Nature, that compared gene activation in chimpanzee and human tissues. And each of those columns is a different tissue, brain tissue, heart, liver and kidney and so forth. And what you find is there really isn't much difference between chimps and humans at all. It turns out that the only organ in which there is really systematic differences between chimps and humans are the testicles. And unfortunately, that is not what we were looking for. We really wanted the difference to be in the brain. So we look at the brain and we say, aha, we know what makes humans special. It's our huge brains. It's the huge brains of humans that make us special. But the problem is there are other animals on the planet that have much larger brains than humans. So it can't just be brain size. So we got more sophisticated and said perhaps it's brain tissue surplus to requirement. And so I have a Viennese virus. It's like a strudel virus that just flew back from Austria. And so if you look here, you look at body weight against brain mass or brain weight, and there's a positive correlation. Larger organisms have larger brains. But perhaps if you buck the trend, if you're above the trend line, that would be revealing. And so you can see humans there have a larger brain than is expected, given their body size, but we're not alone, right? And here comes the dusky dolphin that not only has a larger brain, but has a larger positive residual. So biology has been extremely disappointing with respect to what makes humans special. And so we turn to the thing that allows us to ask the question at all, which is tools. And so here is a tool that's about 2 million years old, and it's a human axe head, to the best of our ability. But unfortunately, here are some more tools: chimp tools, wasp tools, bird tools. And in fact, if you were really honest, and I was to ask you, which of those tools is the most impressive in objective terms? There's absolutely no doubt that you would have said, well, the bird nest looks rather impressive. And I'm not quite sure why we've picked out the human. So somehow it's not tools, and they're older. The birds go back about 10 million years. So what's going on? What does make humans different, given that the objective evidence, biologically and at the level of tools, doesn't really give us an answer? And I think the answer starts appearing very recently. And these are some caves in Indonesia, in Sulawesi. There are similar caves in Arnhem Land in Australia, in Altamira in Spain, in Chauvet in France, and Lascaux, where humans start to represent collectively features of the world in which they live. And this is something that you really don't see elsewhere. And just to put this in perspective, temporally again, tools appear, human tools at least, with Homo habilis about 2 million years ago. Humans as a lineage are just over 5 million years old in terms of our divergence from chimpanzees or chimpanzee-like ancestors. And cave art really appears in the present. And this is just an image, again, I'm not sure you can read it, just to show you that almost everything that you consider of interest that might discriminate humans from other species on the planet, if that is your gig, and it's not mine, is what appears essentially towards the end of the Paleolithic and into the Bronze Age. And so the civilizations that we would adduce as evidence of human uniqueness are really on the order of 5,000 years old. Given that life itself is 2.5 billion years old, it's incredibly recent. And this is the kind of thing that you might pick out that is rather intriguing. This is a Sumerian clay tablet. Inscribed on the surface of that tablet in cuneiform is mathematics. These are arithmetical operations in sexagesimal, that's base 60. Calculations that have been preserved into the present. And so really, the interesting feature of human beings is not evidently found in biology. It's found in something that we might call cognitive artifacts, tools that extend our ability to reason about the world. And these emerged in the Bronze Age. And their basic characteristics are they're collective. No one person invented numbers. No one person invented an alphabet. They were invented by a group. They're transmissible, meaning that they can be perpetuated across many generations, right? And that's something that humans do very, very well. And most interestingly of all, they can be symbolic. They represent abstract concepts like number or relation. So now I want to get to the central thesis of where we're heading, given that larger evolutionary context. And I think it's both challenging and concerning, but also gives us some cause for optimism. The central thesis of this little presentation for you is that there have been two paths that we've been evolving along technologically in relation to these cognitive artifacts. One is building what I call complementary cognitive artifacts, and the other one is competitive. And so essentially, these complementary artifacts are collective amplifiers of human reason. We'll explain what that means in a second. And the competitive ones are analogs of human reason. So here are some complementary cognitive artifacts that go back to the ancient Sumerian civilization up until about the beginning of the 19th century. Numbers. The abacus, that some of you have heard me talk about before. It's one of my favorite cognitive artifacts. Maps, and some scientific instruments. So if you think about a map is made by a collective. It can be transmitted across generations and improved upon. And if I give you a map and allow you to study it and then remove it from you, you still have in your mind's eye a physical representation of space. So a map is an amplifier of cognition, because even when you don't have it, you have this new ability by virtue of having seen it. Here are competitive cognitive artifacts. These things started to become dominant in the 19th century. Mechanical calculators, most recently classifier systems, for example, the system behind DeepMind that beat the current Go champion, and driverless cars. Now, these are fantastic things, but there's a very big distinction between these kinds of cognitive artifacts and the ones I showed you before. Because if I give you a calculator and allow you to calculate, or I give you a car, or a driverless car, and then remove it, not only are you not better than you were before, but you're arguably worse than you were before. Okay? You're worse than you were before. And from the evolutionary perspective, we know this is the case, because I'm going to show you two very interesting species. On the left is a species called Amblyopsis, and it's a cave fish. And it's an interesting cave fish because it's blind. And it's blind because it lives in a cave. And in a cave, there's no light. And when there's no light, you don't need eyes. And so you lose them over the course of many generations. On the right is a more interesting organism. It's Polycarpa. It's a sea squirt. It doesn't have a brain, right? What happens is when it's young, it swims around in the ocean searching for prey. And then as it gets older, it becomes sedentary. And when it becomes sedentary and it no longer has to find prey, it eats its own brain. Okay? All right. I know many people like that. In universities, they're called deans. In companies, they're called CEOs. It's fine. I've said far worse. So this is the golden rule of cognition and evolution, okay? And so we've heard about Moore's law, perhaps a little too much. But it might be that Moore's law implies something worrisome, which is a sort of a mental entropy law. I sometimes call it Moran's law, but it's not politically correct. But the idea here is that, look at this, over a period of about, since the 70s, 50 years, we've had exponential increases in computer power. Look at SAT tests. In the same period, they've declined. How is it acceptable to live in a society when we have such vast increases in technological performance and a diminution in human cognition? So I guess where I'd like to leave it, and I've got surplus time, which is good, is that I think we have to take culture in hand. Maybe it'll give me a minute just to mention genetics. And that is, we have to think very carefully about these two different trajectories that cognitive artifacts are following, the complementary and the competitive. And we have to invest in the complementary and be aware of the distinction. And it's not anti-technology, this talk, because I'll give you what I consider a great example of a complementary cognitive artifact, and that's Minecraft. So Minecraft takes what looks like a competitive cognitive artifact, the digital computer, and puts inside it a world that resembles the analog world of ancient Sumeria, right? So in that world, I build maps and I build devices that amplify my abilities. And so it's not straightforward, but it does mean that we have to be aware of these evolutionary trends. The last thing I do want to mention, Rob, because I think we might discuss it, is CRISPR. I showed you the tree of life. We now have the technology to completely redraw it. And I guess over the next 5 to 10 years, if you were to ask me what the real challenge to human evolution will be, it's probably not in inferential artifacts. It's really high-precision genetic engineering. Thank you very much.
Join me at the couch. With that, I'll invite Moran Cerf out. Oh, yeah. Welcome. Oh, that's right. You don't need this.
Thank you. So, thinking about evolution, I'm a junior professor, and David is a senior president of a university, and you can see that the evolution that we evolve is that he has now a jacket on top of the same outfit. I take personally the comment about the Moran's law. But I'll try to build on the same ideas and tell you where I think we're going and what changes we're going to see. So I'm a neuroscientist, and I focus on looking at how the brain is going to change and what changes we can control when we learn how to understand and work with our own brain to make things better. And there's one moment that I think, for me, really indicates the changes that we're exhibiting that I want to ponder with you on for a second. And that's a moment that many overlooked, because we kind of tend to look at the technology rather than on the human side of a lot of technologies. What I mean by that is many of you probably heard about AI, machine learning, and how they evolve and advanced. And there's many, many moments that could be like flagged as a moment where there was a change that is remarkable. Many point to the moment where computers beat the world chess player in Kasparov in a series games of chess. Some look at Watson playing Jeopardy against the leading players. And there are many, many such moments, but there's one moment that I think was overlooked that I find really interesting during the game of Jeopardy. So if you haven't seen this particular competition in 2011, Ken Jennings, one of the best players out there, and another human player are playing against what's on a computer. And in the beginning of the game, Ken Jennings is taking a huge lead. In the first 20 minutes, he just wins one after the other, many, many points, and Watson makes mistakes and really embarrasses the team that built it. But then 20 minutes into the first game, Watson starts doing better, and it starts climbing. And it gets to a point where it's just one question below Jennings. And Jennings becomes really nervous. And then the question comes, and Jennings actually runs to the button to press it, the buzzer, but Watson beats him to it technologically just by pressing faster. So they both know the answer, but the machine actually is just faster pressing the buzzer. So Watson gets the answer, and he now takes the lead. What you see on the human side is an interesting moment. You see Jennings kind of making this sigh of anger or something frustrating happen to him when he sees how he's losing to a computer, and he becomes much more aggressive. And then for the next 3 questions, he tries to press as fast as possible, but he keeps missing it. Watson takes a bigger and bigger lead. So now, again, if you look at Jennings, you see that he is getting really, really angsty. And the next question comes, and it's something about fabrics. And here comes the interesting moment that, to me, embodies where we're going to be and where we are right now. The question is about fabrics, and Jennings doesn't know the answer yet, but he presses the button as fast as possible. So you see him pressing the buzzer without knowing the answer, and then the host says, Ken, and then you see him doing something like that. Chiffon. This is the moment that is totally overlooked, but I find it as the most interesting moment. It's the moment that humans basically say, we know the answer, we have the intuition, it's buried somewhere in our brain, we're losing, we're angry, and we're going to rely on our intuition to fix it. So we're going to first beat the first thing, which is press the buzzer faster, and we're going to hope that our brain is going to come up with the answer fast enough, and it does. Now, this moment that's totally overlooked is an interesting moment because it's a moment that shows us something that is still unique to humans. This ability to trust ourselves. Now, both humans and computers have statistics that define when they know the answer, and both machines have the same metrics to how to know if something is true or not. But there's something about this frustration, the emotions there, that led Jennings to actually take the lead for a moment before losing entirely. When we speak afterwards, I'm going to tell you why I see this moment as remarkable and why I think that this is not necessarily a positive moment. So, Mother Nature, as David said, has given us a lot of remarkable things in the last many centuries, thousands of years, millions of years. And we evolved to become who we are. But the reality is that it's still a pretty slow process. If you wanted to fly here using your own wings rather than American Airlines, you're going to have to wait a couple of millions of years if it even is beneficial to have wings for humans. You're going to have to wait for a little bump in your shoulders to emerge and then be really better than any other person next to you with this bump, and then have the bump develop feathers and still have those feathers be much better than anyone else's before you. And maybe across many millions of years, if you have advantages time and again that propagate, you might have those wings that allow you to fly to New York faster and anytime you want without paying fees for baggage claims. But the question is, can we speed it up? And what's unique to our time is that we finally, for the first time, have the ability to actually speed up evolution by controlling things. David mentioned CRISPR. We can actually change genes. And I think that Mother Nature is a smart machine that actually gave us a tool to change even faster than what we can do with technology. And that is our brain. We're born with most of our body fixed. Nothing changes much throughout our life. But our brain is the mechanism that we are given to actually adapt to changes in the world. So I'm going to show you 4 things that we know now that we didn't know 10 years ago that allow us to believe now that the ability of the brain to change over time would actually make us harness evolution such that we can actually become better and extend ourselves in our lifetime. So some of you may have heard that there's a field in neuroscience called brain-machine interfaces or brain-computer interfaces, where basically we say, let's take the computers, but plug them somewhere into our brain and allow our brain to control them entirely. One of the embodiment of the successes of this field was the ability in the last decade by a group of scientists at Brown University to actually take human beings who lost the ability to move their limbs, people who were stabbed from the neck down and now are tetraplegic, they can't move anything, people who many years ago had diseases that allowed them, prevented them from moving their bodies, but still have their brain intact. The part of the brain that controls the limbs still works. The motor cortex sitting up here is still there. It's just that there's no connection to your limbs. Well, if the motor cortex is still there, why don't connect some device to your brain that reads your signals and control your hands and have you move your own arms using stimulation, overriding the regular structure, or even taking robotic arms and having robotic arms move for you with your own mind controlling them. This is 10 years ago, because in the last year, we now have the ability not only to move things with our own brain that weren't connected before, but actually get back feedback from the robotic arm as it touches things, and allowing us to know something about the sensations that are out there and actually feed back into our brain. But this is still not as remarkable as what I think we're going to see in the future. Because I think, to me, the most remarkable moment is a moment that comes from a study in University of Pittsburgh, by a guy called Andy Schwartz, where he showed the next level of this brain-computer interface. He took a monkey and tied his right arm and put a robotic arm coming straight from the place where his original biological arm will be. And then he connected his brain to the arm, and he had the monkey look at a marshmallow and try to reach for the marshmallow. Every time the monkey tries to reach for the marshmallow, he tries to move his own arm. It's tied, he cannot, but his brain sends the same signal, moving the robotic arm and having grasped the marshmallow just with his mind using the robotic arm. Now, this is already 7 years old. It's not impressive. Here's where it's impressive to me. We can take the brain and have it control a robotic arm. That's fine. The monkey spends about a week in this situation where he tries to move his own arm and is unable to, and he learns over time to control the robotic arm. What happens after 1 week when you untie his own arm? Here's the interesting moment. The brain of the monkey learned for a week that the part he used to control his arm doesn't work the same way anymore, and he just learned to allocate the resources to the robotic arm. After 1 week, when you untie his own arm, the marshmallow is still there. He is using the same brain to still control the robotic arm to get the marshmallow, and somehow he still has his own brain to control his biological arm and scratch his head while he sees the robotic arm bringing his marshmallow. His brain somehow adapted to learn to control a new limb and his own. And this is evolution. This is a human version 2.0. We take the brain that it is, we attach it to other devices while keeping the existing things we had before. This is a monkey that essentially has now a third arm that he can control using the same brain. Now you can think what this means for us. I flew here from Chicago yesterday, and I had to kind of figure out what's the weather in Miami. So I looked online, and I looked at weather.com, and I saw that it's something around 80 degrees. So I had to peek into my memory and try to recall what 80 degrees feels like. But when I came here, I actually felt it, and it's the same brain that felt the temperature and remember the temperature. What if I just plugged weather.com to my brain, and when I just go there for a second, I would feel 80 degrees, know exactly how it feels like it, and then decide what to wear when I actually go to Miami? What if I connect my car to my brain, such that when I drive, instead of just seeing a little device that tells me that it's about to be empty and I need to get more gas, I would actually feel it in my body. The brain connects to the machine, and I would just maybe feel hunger, telling me it's time to get more fuel for your car. Or maybe connect my stock portfolio to the pain and pleasure in my brain. So when my stocks fall down, I would feel pain, and when my stocks were up, I would feel good. How remarkable would it be to actually understand the markets viscerally using your own body? And this takes us, well, I'm already out of time, I'm going to tell you quickly the next two things. This takes us to a step further, where we can actually use the brain that is plastic and adapts to the environment to really extend our abilities. If you think of the brain, we always think about it as like a thinking, living organism, but in fact, the brain sits in a dark place, full of liquid, between a very, very structured environment that's supposed to keep it safe. It doesn't see the world, it doesn't hear anything, it doesn't smell anything. All we have are plug-and-play devices out there that feed information into the brain, translate it into signal the brain can actually speak in, which are chemical and electrochemical. And then the brain interprets that as seeing, hearing, smelling, touching. We don't really interact with the world. It's very likely that the world around us has a lot more things that we don't see. If a bat were here, it would fly between the rays that come out of all your pockets with beaming devices that tell you where you are and how you are compared to a global positioning system. The bat would see those things and it would fly between them. We don't see them, but they exist. It's just that our plug-and-play devices, called the eyes, don't have this particular ability. But the brain inside has the ability to see those things. The brain of the bat and the brain of a human inherently are the same. They have the same mechanism that work. It's just that the bat has different eyes, and it translates to its own brain different things. Now that we know that, we can actually think of taking the bat's eyes, plugging them into our own brain, and teaching our brain to see more things out there. We know that people who are born deaf and actually benefit from the cochlear implant, something that allows them to hear after not hearing for the rest of their life, within a couple of hours, start having their brain learn how to hear the signals out there and translate it into sounds. And within hours, they can actually already determine who is speaking, who is not, what is a sound, what is a noise, and so on. This means that our brain, within many, many trials, can actually do something, which is learn how to read information and parse that. We can now think of all kinds of information that we can translate into something that our brain understands and have our brain by itself learn how to find the meaning, the signal in this noise and identify what we ourselves cannot cognitively identify. And this brings me to the last 2 points, which I'm going to just mention, which is since we think of the brain as a system that actually has a cognitive and unconscious parts that do processing without understanding, we now know more and more how the unconscious processing happens. We actually know how things happen in the brain that are not accessible to us. And we can even see them seconds before they become accessible to us. So now we can actually probe into the brain and see the process of decision making in a very early stage and know how a thought evolves into a choice that is accessible to you. And because we know it early enough, we can not only change it, but we can also erase it, intervene with it, and actually change your perceptions about things as if they are your own choices. This goes into the core of what we think is us, memories. We think that our history is what makes us who we are. And now we know that memories are just another malleable, changing things in our brain that we can actually prompt, change, alter. So we can actually make you go into the future thinking that your past is something that we created, and you will move into the future with a narrative that we set for you, thinking it's yours and believing entirely that it was something that you created. Someone yesterday spoke about the fact that one of the best ways to influence people is having their friends tell them what they like. Actually, there's one thing that's even better, telling yourself what you like. But if you don't really know, if I put the thought there, who do you trust? If all you have is the present and the current experience, and all that you have in the past is something that can be changed. We now know how to change your behavior in various ways. We now know how to quickly adapt your memories to a point where you actually will believe things that did not happen have happened, and vice versa. This is a new world that we're kind of exploring right now, allowing us to see more of the world, to understand more of ourselves, to know how we decide, and to understand better what makes us who we are. And I'm going to leave that for us to discuss, but I think that this moment with Ken Jennings, where there was one thing that was human, that made him made the choice he made and behave the same way, seems to us like the one remedy that keeps us unique, that keeps us better, that keeps us, allows us to be who we are. But the reality is that even that now is something that we can replicate, change, alter, which leaves us with the question of what is to be human anymore? Mother Nature gave us the tools to speed up things. It left us with a system that's adaptive, that can actually alter and modify our experiences. But the more we know about it, we can actually start toying with it and figuring how it works, to the point that the question is, what remains you in all of those things that are able to be changed by others? And I'm going to talk about that with everyone else. Thank you.
Thank you. So thanks, Moran and David. We set this up where each of you will react to the other's comments. So I'd like to start with that, but then we're going to go to the question after, which you pose, Moran, which is, what is it to be human anymore? What is it to be human anymore? So before we get to that, David, any thoughts about what Moran just presented?
Well, yeah, it's a fascinating new territory. The one corrective I would introduce is that
the senior faculty is helping you out here.
It's the jacket gives me that ability. You keep saying the experiment that you described with monkeys, and you kept saying human 2.0. It's not a human characteristic. The brain plasticity you're describing is present almost everywhere. I think really to understand humans means looking beyond the brain into the cultural collective. And I think that's the one remark. I think there's so much emphasis on the biological, but really, if you ask me what humans are, they're this weird symbiotic matrix of biological, cultural
associations. Embedded within all of these associations.
Right. And that's I think it's a little bit under-theorized.
Well, there's a whole lot of work in philosophy around that.
That's true.
But we haven't done much to translate philosophy into
in
fact,
science.
You bring up an interesting point. Back in the 30s, 40s, 50s, people like Alfred North Whitehead and Karl Popper and others were spending a lot of time trying to philosophically understand knowledge and science and spending a lot of time in the scientific space to understand that. I don't think we have enough of that going on right now. Moran, any reactions or corrections for Dr. Krakauer?
I think my entire talk it was changed while I was in the backstage based on the results. Okay, I've got to continue exactly this thing. Also, I am a neuroscientist, but I also teach marketing, so Human 2.0 is just a better name than Monkey. The Monkey 2.0. I think it's just like a good everyone's going to remember this thing. So I kind of built on, but I think that where David ended, I think to me is something that, and where I ended is something that we need to merge into one thing that we didn't say, and both of us, and I think it's important, which is technology advances really, really fast. CRISPR is an example of something that wasn't there not many years ago.
Could you explain briefly CRISPR so that people know what it is? David, you're the geneticist on stage.
So CRISPR is essentially a technology that we stole from bacteria that allows us to target and edit any gene sequence that we like. And so in principle, we could basically replace every single gene in our body if we wanted to.
And that's just bounded onto the stage in the past couple of years, and there's a ton of research going on. And of course, the ethical arguments are following way behind where
so this was my point. My point was that I mentioned what we can do. And we're getting really touching the surface of how to change memories, how to change behaviors, how to make you erase things that you like, things that were pretty, core to our existence. And scientists find it, they publish it, and they kind of unleash it to society. It's true for CRISPR, it's true for some of the things I mentioned. And because we're so fast, because the world advances so fast in the last couple of years, where we're lagging is in ethics and regulation. So I think that we don't really know what to do with that. There are no clear rules that say what you can and cannot do with CRISPR. Now there are some. There definitely are no rules to what you can and cannot do to a person when they're sleeping while their brain rehearses memories and you can actually hit them and change them. All kinds of moments that are critical that scientists are knowing about and we have to decide how to respond.
Can I just, I mean, there's a lot of, I think there's a lot of, hot air about, I have to say this because the special era we live in and, the incredible pace of change. And that's sort of true, but I think that it's a little bit an instance of human exceptionalism again, wanting to make your own time the very special time. And I would claim that, in fact, if you look at ancient Sumer and the invention of place-based number systems, which they inscribed in the longest-lived technology for storing information that exists on the planet, right? The cuneiform clay tablet. It's incredibly impressive. The technology, we can't access our information that's more than 10 years old, right? This is 5,000
I have a floppy disk and I can't figure out how to get stuff off of it.
That's right.
Right.
So so that's one thing. I think the more pressing issue for us to deal with really is this notion of whether the technology is complementary or competitive.
Yeah.
Does it want to replace us or does it want to augment us? And that's the ethical debate. I think just the discussion about change, to me, is almost as tiresome as the debate about failure. Yeah. It's just a current faddish way of describing the current period that I think is largely ahistorical.
So the debate about, we need to change the debate about failure, and the discussion about change has failed?
Well, I think we should put it in a larger historical context.
Great. Yeah. So let's put this in a larger historical context. Your cognitive and competitive artifacts it's a brilliant way to think about the world. But there's already evidence that people using GPS, the part of their brain that might otherwise read a map and have spatial understanding, is atrophying. I know it's happening to me from using GPS, but what about what you just mentioned, which is augmented reality, for instance, augmented capabilities? What about to the point where we can start to integrate these technologies into our cognitive system, where it actually becomes part of it, whether that's a physical piece of technology that's connected, like Moran was talking about, or the ability to CRISPR out certain genes and create enhanced capabilities. Does that then square the circle?
Well, we already have. I mean, this again, I just want to put this in context. In our societies, in Western societies, largely in Western European societies, the Roman Empire and the Holy Roman Empire used Roman numerals. Okay? that meant that up until about 1500, Europeans could not multiply numbers together. And the only way in which it could be done is if you were trained to use an abacus. So for 1,500 years, you could not multiply. Okay? In India and Arabia, they had invented a new number system.
Yeah.
Once that's in your brain, Rob, it gives you a superpower. And I think that's the point. That is true augmentation that happened historically. And I imagine there will be technological analogs. But again, I think it behooves us to look a little bit more carefully at what happened historically to gain an insight into what might happen in the future.
Great. Moran, augmentation of human capabilities integrated into the brain.
So, I believe that we are in a little extraordinary area just because of the Moore's law, and I still, and maybe I'm biased to think that when I'm alive is much more interesting, but, I think about it because I do feel that like, everything is now more exponential. So I'm thinking about a moment that I alluded to in my talk that I think to me is the key moment when it talks about like the augmentation and the risk of it. A story. That's going to be
great.
So this winter I went to help a group of friends who write a TV series in Hollywood called Limitless about the brain. And it's a sci-fi TV series, but I wanted them to incorporate some neuroscience into the TV series. And I went there and I basically sat in the writer's room and had ideas that you can put in the TV series that make the character kind of do more with its brain, augment its brain. At some point I ventured outside of my particular interest in like, neuroscience, and I said, I have ideas for the script entirely, like change your script. And my ideas were to have one episode where the character doesn't win. So in every episode there's like a puzzle and the guy kind of through the power of his brain enhanced, somehow solved the puzzle. And I said, what if we have one episode that it just fails, that nothing works? And they all kind of laughing, say, doesn't work this way, Hollywood. Like we start with the end, we know how it ends, and then we go backwards to how he solves the thing. But I said it's going to be amazing if he fails, like if the brain doesn't get there. It's like it's no matter what we do the brain, it doesn't solve the puzzle. And this ties to where I think there's a moment that I think is very humbling to humans. We are self-centered as a species, and we think that it's all about us, and we compare ourselves to robots and machines and AI, and we keep saying, oh, what's going to happen to us? And in every movie that I've seen about the battle between humans and machines, there's kind of the same narrative. We build a computer that's really, really smart and strong, and a robot that's very powerful, and it starts attacking us. And then there's a battle, and the computer is better than us in everything. Like it's stronger and it's faster, and we kind of the movie seems like we're gonna be doomed. But then, minute number 75 of the movie, through the sheer power of love or intuition or inspiration, kind of like the Ken Jennings moment. Like he has this like moment of inspiration, and through that thing we actually win, and that's how the movie ends. Now I think that this is because all of the movies are made for humans. Yeah. Once the computers are going to start making their own movies, once AI gets there, it's going to be
for computers.
Minute 75, because of the power of love, inspiration, insight. That's where they're going to kill us because they say, oh, they're like so easy. Like we know their flaws. So I think that in a way, we think of okay, that's amazing. We're so amazing. Like they're never going to beat us on this thing. I think this is maybe the thing that is not great about us.
So one last question before we can go. We could obviously talk about this for the rest of the day. But one last question, what's one thing that concerns you that the public does not know about this entire realm that they should know or be thinking about?
Tough.
There's so much.
Yeah, just one, David, just one.
I never answer. I have an answer, so I can go
Okay,
first.
no, you go first because it's a lot.
Actually, I have a surprising answer because it's not about a specific result. It's about how science is done. Okay. So I think that there's kind of, when we think about climate change, when we think about, there's a lot of debates still about things that we think we know the answer pretty conclusively, but here's when it's interesting. We say something like 90% of scientists believe this particular thing and 10% do not, and we argue about that. The thing is, more and more I see that when we say 90% of people believe that this is true, that science is true, the 10% who don't believe are scientists. So many times scientists are very much questioning the results. So we hear titles on the news that we now know how to do this and this, and the scientists say, I'm skeptical, this is probably a BBC or New York Times headline, let's look at the paper and see what's going on. What I'm bothered by the most right now is the fact that there's a mismatch overall by the public as to what we can and cannot do, and it's informed by kind of a very, like flashy headline that makes us miss the real story. And it's true for neuroscience, biology, it's true for a lot of things. I think this is where I'm concerned, and I feel that my job is to inform a lot of the public, but just what's true and what's not, because it's not fully in control.
Right. David,
All right,
what
I've
are
had
you,
lots of
what
time.
are you concerned?
No, I don't think it's, I want to turn it around. I don't think it's, there's so much science that's not understood or known by anybody. I think the larger concern I have, in fact raised in the very interesting discussion this morning, in this morning's session, which has to do with who leads. And I think that the customer, in that conversation, was it the customer or the company? And I think that what I found very surprising is how excited people get about advances in technology, which are essentially worthless, but give us an additional source of entertainment or minimize effort, or reduce effort. Our reactive, responsive position with respect to technological innovation, as opposed to humans who have a moral sense and an ethical sense, actually demanding or asking of technology companies. I think it's too supply-side driven. I think human beings have to actually assume greater responsibility in the trajectory for the evolution of technologies. That, for me, is a much greater concern than any particular scientific fact that the public does or does not know.
Great. Thank you. Greater responsibility, that's us. How do we do that? Even if we want to step up, what is it we're actually requiring and requesting? Who leads? Take culture in hand, you said in your opening remarks. That's interesting. I'm still trying to figure out what it means. I think there's a lot in that. Take culture in hand, into account, into change, into context. I'm not sure. Moran, limitless. The original VR device was the brain. We don't experience anything directly. We take in data from our plug-and-play devices, it translates it, and we have what we think is our experience, and even that can be changed and transformed. So you mentioned a movie, stereotypical movie of the humans against computers. There is a story that doesn't go that direction. It's a fable of John Henry. Many of you might recognize this fable. It comes from the building of the railroads. It used to be that human beings would stand there with heavy mallets and they would beat the spikes in to lay the track. It was called tracking across the United States, Britain. It was very labor intensive, and there was a mythical man named John Henry who was this massive individual who could drive stakes 1,000 times faster, you know, the whole mythological thing. And then the machine showed up and everyone was at risk. And he challenged the machine. Whoever could make it through the mountain first would win, and his colleagues would retain their jobs. And of course, through extraordinary superhuman, interesting to note superhuman effort, he prevailed and immediately died. So not all stories end happily. But I can say that we're immensely thankful that people like David and Moran are doing a lot of thinking about these issues. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.